What if I told you that one of the most bizarre, chaotic, and revealing protests in history wasn't a riot in the streets, but a citywide massacre of cats? This isn't a horror story. It's a real event from 18th century Paris, a story so strange it peels back the layers of society on the brink of revolution. Forget what you think you know about history. We're diving into the dark, comedic, and deeply symbolic tale of the Great Cat Massacre. It's a story about class warfare, witchcraft, and how a group of tormented workers found a truly twisted way to get back at their boss. To understand how a city of artisans and intellectuals could erupt into a feline bloodbath, we need to step back in time, onto the cobblestone streets of 1730s Paris. This wasn't the romantic city of lights we picture today. It was a bustling, overcrowded, and often grimy metropolis, a world of stark contrasts between the wealthy and the poor. Our story unfolds not in a palace or a revolutionary salon, but in a far more common setting, a printing shop on the Rue Saint-Séverin. Printing was a prestigious trade, a gateway to the world of letters and enlightenment. But for those at the bottom of the ladder, life was anything but enlightened. The printing world had a rigid hierarchy. At the very top was the master printer, the bourgeois owner of the shop. He lived in relative comfort with his family, often in an apartment directly above the workshop. Below him were the journeymen, skilled workers who had completed their training but hadn't yet become masters themselves. And at the very bottom, covered in ink and grime, were the apprentices. These were young boys and men, bound to the master for a set number of years to learn the trade. Their lives were a grueling cycle of relentless labor and systemic humiliation. An apprentice's day began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. They were responsible for the most backbreaking tasks, mixing the viscous, foul-smelling ink, hauling heavy reams of paper, and operating the cumbersome wooden presses that required immense physical strength. The work was monotonous and physically draining. They slept in the coldest, dampest corners of the shop, often on makeshift beds of straw on the floor. Their food was disgusting, usually the unappetizing leftovers from the master's table, scraps that were barely fit for human consumption. One of the apprentices who later documented this bizarre event, Nicolas Cantat, wrote about the sheer misery of their existence. He described being fed cat food, the foulest cuts of meat and moldy bread, while the master and his wife dined on fine roasts and pastries upstairs. The apprentices were constantly subjected to verbal and physical abuse. Any mistake, no matter how small, could result in a beating. They were treated as less than human, as pieces of machinery meant to be worked until they broke. They were trapped in a system that promised them a future as a skilled artisan, but delivered a present filled with suffering, hunger, and despair. This constant state of exhaustion and degradation created a powder keg of resentment. The apprentices hated the journeymen who ordered them around, and they despised the master who exploited them. But the object of their most intense, most visceral hatred was something far more unexpected: the master's cats. Now in the 21st century, we see cats as beloved companions, the adorable rulers of the internet. But in 18th century France, the relationship with felines was far more complicated. On one hand, they were useful for catching rats in workshops and granaries. On the other, they were deeply entwined with centuries of folklore and superstition. Cats, especially black cats, were often seen as agents of evil, the familiars of witches, or even demons in disguise. The sound of a cat howling at night could be interpreted as a terrible omen, a harbinger of death or disaster. This dark reputation was a key ingredient in the events to come. In our specific printing shop on the Rue Saint-Séverin, the master's wife was a devoted cat lover. She kept dozens of them. They weren't just mousers, they were pampered pets. While the apprentices starved on scraps, these cats were fed choice bits of food from the master's own plate. While the boys shivered on the cold floor, the cats slept in warm baskets, sometimes even in the master's own bed. The injustice was infuriatingly visible. The apprentices saw these creatures, these symbols of witchcraft and darkness, being treated with more kindness and dignity than they were. The master's wife's favorite was a gray cat she lovingly called La Grise. This cat was the queen of the household, enjoying a life of luxury the apprentices could only dream of. For the young workers, these cats became the living, purring embodiment of their oppression. They represented the master's hypocrisy, the social order that valued a pampered animal over a hardworking human being. Every time they saw a cat being stroked by the master's wife or fed a piece of chicken, their own hunger and humiliation gnawed at them. The resentment simmered, waiting for a spark to ignite it. That spark came in the form of noise. The neighborhood was overrun with stray cats. Every night, the rooftops would come alive with their screeching and caterwauling as they fought and mated. For the apprentices, trying to get a few hours of precious sleep on their miserable straw beds, the nightly racket was sheer torture. It was the final insult. They were worked to the bone all day, only to be kept awake all night by the very creatures that symbolized their misery. The noise, the hunger, the beatings, the injustice, it all coalesced into a singular, burning hatred for cats. One of the apprentices, a witty and rebellious young man named Leveille, decided they had had enough. He devised a plan, a brilliant and diabolical piece of psychological warfare. The plan was not to simply kill the cats. That would be too simple, and it would get them in serious trouble. They needed to make the master himself order the cat's destruction. Leveille's idea was to exploit the superstitions of the master and his wife. He was an excellent mimic. He proposed that one of them, likely himself, would climb onto a nearby roof each night and imitate the most horrifying cat scream imaginable. He wouldn't just sound like a cat. He would sound like a demon, a soul in torment, a witch's familiar delivering a curse upon the house. The goal was to terrify the master and his wife, to make them believe that their house was besieged by supernatural forces, that they were the victims of a bewitching. It was a gamble, but the apprentices were desperate and had a flair for the dramatic. The performance began. Night after night, one of the apprentices would perch on the roof and unleash a series of blood-curdling screeches that echoed through the narrow street. The sound was so unsettling, so unnatural, that it terrified everyone who heard it. The master and his wife were particularly affected. They couldn't sleep. They lay awake in their bed, listening to what they believed was the sound of devils congregating outside their window. Their superstitions, deeply ingrained by the culture of the time, took over. They imagined witches casting spells, using the neighborhood cats as their conduits. The master's wife became convinced that an army of demons, led by a satanic tomcat, was coming to attack her. The nightly ritual continued, and the master's household was thrown into chaos. He and his wife were sleep-deprived, anxious, and utterly convinced their lives were in danger. They complained that they were being bewitched. The master, unable to work effectively during the day and tormented by the demonic sounds at night, finally reached his breaking point. One morning, haggard and desperate, he stormed into the workshop and gave the order the apprentices had been dreaming of. He commanded them to get rid of the cats, all of them. He didn't just want them chased away, he wanted them gone, believing that destroying the animals would break the curse. This was the moment of victory. The master had not only authorized their revenge, he had commanded it. The apprentices had successfully manipulated their oppressor into sanctioning his own symbolic humiliation. With the master's blessing, the hunt began. The workshop transformed into a scene of organized chaos. The apprentices, filled with a gleeful, manic energy, armed themselves with whatever they could find: iron bars, printing sticks, broom handles, and burlap sacks. They fanned out across the workshop and the courtyard, their faces lit with a grim joy. This was not just pest control, this was a festival of vengeance. They chased cats from under the printing presses, from the rafters, from the alleyways. The air was filled with the sounds of shrieking animals and the triumphant shouts of the apprentices. Leveille, the mastermind, proved to be the most ruthless hunter. He cornered the master's wife's beloved pet, La Grise, and despite her pleas, delivered a decisive blow with an iron bar. He then stuffed the stunned or dead animal into a sack. The capture of La Grise was the ultimate prize, the symbolic overthrow of the pampered favorite. No cat was safe. They rounded up dozens of them, stuffing them writhing and hissing into sacks. The journeyman, caught up in the carnivalesque atmosphere, joined in. The workshop, normally a place of grueling labor and strict order, had become a stage for anarchic violence. The master watched, perhaps with a growing sense of unease at the sheer brutality he had unleashed, but he did not stop them. He had given the order, and now he had to see it through. But the apprentices were not finished. Simply killing the cats wasn't enough. Their revenge needed ceremony. It needed to be a performance, a public spectacle that would mock the very foundations of the master's authority. So they decided to hold a trial. They dragged the sacks of captured cats to the center of the courtyard and staged a full-blown mock tribunal. They appointed judges, prosecutors, and a confessor. A guard of honor was formed, composed of apprentices holding printing sticks like swords. The cats were brought forth, one by one, to face their accusers. They were charged with heinous crimes, including witchcraft, sedition, and disturbing the peace with their nightly howling. The trial was a dark parody of the justice system, a system that so often worked against the poor and powerless. The apprentices read out the charges with solemn gravity, while their comrades struggled to suppress their laughter. Of course, the verdict was never in doubt. All the cats were found guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. They constructed a makeshift gallows in the courtyard, and with great ceremony, proceeded to execute the condemned felines. One by one, the cats were pulled from the sacks and strung up. The scene was utterly surreal. The apprentices acted as both solemn executioners and a cheering crowd, roaring with laughter as the animals were hanged. The historian Robert Darnton, who famously analyzed this event, describes it as a carnival, a moment where the normal rules of society were turned upside down. The powerless apprentices became judges and executioners. The respected master was made a fool. The cherished pets were treated as condemned criminals. It was a world inverted, a brief, violent festival where the oppressed got to sit in the seat of power. When the master's wife heard the commotion and saw the gallows with her beloved pets hanging from it, she was horrified. She began to scream, convinced the apprentices were not just killing cats, but were murderers capable of killing anyone. Her husband had to restrain her. For her, this was a terrifying breakdown of order. But for the apprentices, it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. They laughed so hard they couldn't work. Nicolas Cantat wrote that they reenacted the entire scene for days afterward, mimicking the trial, the hangings, and the horrified reaction of the master's wife. Their laughter was a release, a catharsis for years of pent-up rage and humiliation. So what did it all mean? Why this bizarre, ritualistic slaughter of animals? On the surface, it looks like a simple case of animal cruelty, a disturbing prank by frustrated young men. But to understand the Great Cat Massacre, you have to look deeper into the symbolic language of the 18th century working class. This wasn't just about killing cats. It was about attacking the master. The apprentices couldn't strike their master directly. The consequences would be severe, so they attacked what he valued. By killing his wife's pampered pets, they were symbolically attacking the master's household, his authority, and even his honor. In the folklore of the time, cats were often linked to female sexuality and cuckoldry. To kill a mistress's cat was a common way to symbolically accuse her of infidelity, and by extension, to insult her husband. The mock trial and execution were also a direct parody of the master's power. The master held the power of a judge over his apprentices, and the state held the power to execute criminals. By staging their own trial and execution, the apprentices were mocking the very structures of justice and authority that kept them oppressed. They were saying, look, we can be judges too. We can pass sentence. We can take a life. It was a powerful, albeit gruesome, assertion of their own agency. The historian Robert Darnton argues that the entire event was a form of popular protest, a way for an illiterate or semi-literate group of workers to express complex grievances. They couldn't write a political pamphlet or organize a formal strike. Instead, they used the language they knew, the language of street theater, of carnival, of symbolic violence. The massacre was a message, encoded in the bizarre ritual of a mock trial for cats. It was a way of communicating their hatred for the master, their resentment of his wife, and their rejection of the brutal working conditions they endured. This strange episode, hidden in the memoirs of an obscure printer's apprentice, offers a rare glimpse into the culture of pre-revolutionary France. It shows the deep, simmering tensions between the classes. The French Revolution wouldn't erupt for another 50 years, but the anger that fueled it was already present in places like this small printing shop. The Cat Massacre was not a political revolt, but it came from the same wellspring of injustice and frustration. It demonstrates how ordinary people, long before they stormed the Bastille, found creative and sometimes shocking ways to resist their oppressors and assert their humanity. They used the tools they had, mimicry, superstition, and a dark sense of humor, to fight a symbolic battle when a real one was impossible. The story of the Great Cat Massacre is a powerful reminder that history is not just made up of grand battles and famous leaders. It's also found in the strange, seemingly insignificant events that reveal the hidden beliefs and tensions of a bygone era. It was a dark comedy, a brutal protest, and a desperate cry for dignity, all played out through the strange and tragic medium of a feline tribunal. It forces us to ask what a culture finds funny, and how laughter itself can be a weapon. For those apprentices, the massacre was the funniest joke in the world, a joke that let them, for one glorious day, turn their world upside down. It makes you wonder about the hidden transcripts of resistance in our own time. What are the symbolic cats being targeted today, in our offices, factories, and workplaces, as people find ways to push back against systems they feel are unjust? The methods may have changed, but the fundamental human impulse to resist humiliation and demand respect remains as powerful as ever. The echoes of those apprentices' laughter and the cries of the cats on the Rue Saint-Séverin still have much to teach us about the enduring struggle for power and dignity.